For a moment in the early 1980s, going to the movies meant preparing to be attacked by the screen. Axes flew towards the audience, sharks lunged out of the ocean, hands reached through the darkness like the theater itself had turned against you. Horror wasn't satisfied with suspense alone, it wanted a reaction and preferably one that made you spill your popcorn. This was the Great 3D Revival, powered by cardboard glasses, practical effects, and pure showmanship. Logic often took a back seat to spectacle as studios leaned hard into anything that could be thrown, stabbed, launched, or shattered directly at the audience. It was gimmicky, absolutely, but it was also a fascinating moment where horror became part amusement park ride, part slasher movie. Tonight, we're diving into 10 films that defined the 80s 3D boom, from franchise sequels to strange sci-fi detours that used the format to turn every scene into a stunt. It didn't last long, but it left behind some of the strangest and most memorable movies of the decade.
Jaws 3D, 1983. The world's most famous predatory shark returns, this time infiltrating the artificial lagoons and underwater tunnels of SeaWorld Orlando. As the park prepares for a massive high-profile celebrity grand opening, a colossal 35-foot great white slips through a malfunctioning water gate. When the underwater tourism attraction becomes a literal feeding ground, a team of marine biologists and engineers must race against time to trap the beast before it breaks through the glass tunnels, housing hundreds of trapped tourists. Taking the legendary franchise away from the open ocean, director Joe Alves utilizes the specialized AriVision over and under lens system to bring the underwater terror into the third dimension. The film swaps out the Hitchcockian suspense of the original for pure B-movie spectacle. The camera glides through tight concrete tunnels and murky aquatic environments, creating a heavy sense of claustrophobia that benefits significantly from the added depth. From floating severed limbs to the iconic jaws slowly closing around the lens, the visual layout is engineered to make the aquatic environment feel incredibly close. The production stands out for its unique workplace setting and its sheer ambition in handling massive practical sets. Rather than relying on traditional editing, Alves builds tension by allowing giant mechanical sharks and deep-sea divers to drift forward from the background of the frame. It remains a fascinating artifact of studio excess, turning a prestigious horror franchise into an interactive, waterlogged creature feature. Coming at Ya, 1981. A brutal gang of outlaws raids a peaceful wedding, shoots the groom, and kidnaps his beautiful new bride to sell into human trafficking. Left for dead at the altar, the rugged cowboy pulls himself together, straps on his guns, and embarks on a relentless, blood-soaked rescue mission across the desert. He methodically tracks the gang down one by one, turning the arid wilderness into a chaotic battlefield fueled by pure vengeance. This independent spaghetti western single-handedly sparked the massive 1980s theatrical revival of three-dimensional cinema. Director Ferdinando Baldi intentionally constructs the entire narrative around the optical format, staging nearly every single sequence to maximize the illusion of depth. Instead of subtle environmental immersion, the production leans into unabashed showmanship. Audiences were bombarded with a non-stop assault of arrows, flaming brands, shattering glass, and snapping whips thrust directly toward the lens. The joy of this grindhouse relic lies in its absolute dedication to physical gimmicks. While the story follows a standard, stripped-down revenge blueprint, the sheer variety of objects hurled at the audience keeps the pacing frantic. Utilizing the specialized twin-lens projection system, the film transforms standard desert shootouts into an interactive theme park ride. It remains an essential milestone of exploitation history, a loud, campy, and unapologetic experiment that proved audiences were hungry to see the screen literally punch its way into the theater. Friday the 13th, Part 3, 1982. A grieving group of co-eds travels to a lakeside cabin at Crystal Lake for a relaxing weekend getaway, completely unaware that the deformed killer Jason Voorhees has taken refuge in a nearby barn. As the teens settle in, Jason begins systematically stalking and slaughtering them, using whatever tools he can find. This bloody weekend alters the course of horror history when the killer discovers a vintage hockey mask, adopting the iconic visage that would define the franchise forever. Director Steve Miner utilized the specialized Mark's 3D system to drag audiences directly into the crosshairs of the slasher genre. The camera placement is intentionally predatory, frequently shooting from Jason's perspective to thrust weapons, spear guns, pitchforks, hot pokers, and machetes, directly through the screen. The format is also used for lighter, campier moments, like a character juggling fruit or spinning a yo-yo directly into the lens. This creates a fascinating tonal contrast between harmless carnival-style tricks and brutal, eye-popping kills. This installment is celebrated by horror fans for its campy energy and historic franchise milestones. The production features a driving, disco-infused electronic remix of Harry Manfredini's classic theme song, perfectly capturing the early 80s aesthetic. By stepping away from the grim realism of the first two entries, this chapter embraces the theatricality of its presentation, transforming the standard cabin-in-the-woods slasher setup into a highly interactive, funhouse-style viewing experience. Parasite, 1982. In a dystopian, corporate-controlled future, a brilliant research scientist breaks away from a sinister government organization after creating a horrific, flesh-eating parasite. He flees to a decaying desert town, accidentally bringing a specimen with him. When the slimy, aggressive organism escapes and begins using the local townspeople as hosts to grow at an exponential rate, the scientist must team up with a young desert survivalist to destroy his creation before it breeds out of control. This low-budget creature feature is a masterclass in claustrophobic body horror staging. Renowned exploitation director Charles Band utilizes the stereoscopic format to emphasize the grotesque, fleshy textures of the monsters. Instead of wide-open vistas, the camera focuses on tight, shadowy boarding houses and industrial ruins. The film serves as an incredible time capsule of early 80s practical effects work, featuring early creature designs from a young Stan Winston. The narrative moves at a deliberate, suspenseful pace, letting the bleak, post-industrial atmosphere soak into the frame. Demi Moore shines in her very first major feature film role, bringing an unexpected grounded energy to the sci-fi madness. It remains a gritty, slimy standby of independent horror, utilizing its visual gimmicks to intensify a genuinely unsettling atmosphere of biological decay. Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, 1983. When a luxury civilian starliner explodes in deep space, three beautiful women manage to escape in a pod, crash-landing on a desolate, plague-ridden scrap planet. They are immediately captured by the forces of the tyrannical cyborg warlord Overdog. Desperate for a payday, a cynical, down-on-his-luck space salvager tracks the distress signal to the planet, teaming up with a feral scavenger girl to navigate the toxic, booby-trapped wasteland and stage a high-stakes rescue. This sci-fi adventure weaponizes its three-dimensional presentation to make its junkyard world feel incredibly tactile. Director Lamont Johnson bypasses clean, futuristic space stations in favor of gritty, industrial desert outposts built from actual scrap metal and discarded vehicles. The depth of field is used brilliantly during high-speed chase sequences involving armored buggies, with debris and explosions kicking up directly into the viewer's face. The optical illusion turns the flat desert terrain into a jagged labyrinth of rusted pipes and rocky canyons. The film excels as a charmingly unpolished post-Star Wars space western powered by practical world-building. Peter Strauss delivers a wonderfully grumpy performance as the reluctant hero, balanced perfectly by Molly Ringwald in one of her very first feature film roles. The production design is incredibly dense, utilizing massive, physical sets and grotesque prosthetic makeups for Overdog's mutant army. It stands as a prime example of vintage space fantasy world-building, where the format allows you to practically smell the rust and engine grease. Amityville 3D, 1983. A skeptical investigative journalist, famous for exposing fraudulent spiritual mediums, decides to purchase the notorious abandoned waterfront house in Amityville. Convinced that the home's dark history is nothing more than an elaborate urban legend, he moves in, determined to use the space as a quiet writing retreat. His rational worldview is shattered when a series of bizarre, fatal accidents plague his family, revealing that a genuine, malevolent, supernatural force resides deep within the basement's hidden well. Directed by veteran filmmaker Richard Fleischer, this supernatural chapter brings a slick, old-school Hollywood professionalism to the haunted house genre. Fleischer uses the specialized stereo vision system to systematically mapping out the geography of the infamous house. The camera glides down long hallways and stares up winding staircases, using the illusion of depth to make the architecture feel alive and threatening. Memorable set pieces, including a swarm of attacking flies and a demonic entity bursting from an underground pit, are framed to push straight past the barrier of the screen. The production stands out for its cold, clinical approach to paranormal terror, subverting the expectations of the series with sharp visual effects. Tony Roberts gives a solid, stubborn performance as the non-believing protagonist, whose skepticism provides a clever contrast to the escalating supernatural chaos. The film features a highly creative, explosive final act, where the entire house becomes an optical playground of fire and flying debris. It remains a highly creative, visually distinct entry in the franchise that transforms a classic haunted house into a dynamic funhouse of floating terrors. Metalstorm, The Destruction of Jared-Syn, 1983. On a barren desert planet, a heroic space ranger tracks a dangerous, mystical dictator named Jared-Syn, who is harvesting the life force of the planet's inhabitants using a giant glowing crystal. Along his journey through the treacherous canyons, the ranger recruits a nomadic scavenger and a legendary disgraced warrior to help him track down the tyrant's hidden fortress. Together, they must survive attacks from mutant nomads, giant underground worms, and high-speed flying vehicles. This space fantasy epic combines the aesthetic of Mad Max with the grand mythology of classic Saturday morning serials. Exploitation pioneer Charles Band leverages stereoscopic depth to turn the vast, rocky terrain of California's Red Rock Canyon into a sprawling, multi-layered alien world. The action choreography leans into the format with incredible frequency, featuring high-speed hoverbike chases that zoom directly into the camera lens, alongside glowing plasma blasts and reaching cybernetic arms that burst outward into the theater. The charm of the movie lies in its unbridled enthusiasm and dense practical world-building. The production features incredibly colorful costume designs, eccentric prosthetics, and an absolute caravan of custom-built desert vehicles. Richard Mall delivers a wonderfully menacing performance as a towering cybernetic executioner, adding a distinct comic book villain energy to the desert warfare. It remains a definitive, fast-paced slice of 1980s sci-fi nostalgia, maximizing its optical presentation to make its low-budget alien landscapes feel incredibly grand. Silent Madness, 1984. A glitch in a computer database accidentally triggers the release of a homicidal psychopath from a high-security mental institution. The killer immediately returns to the scene of his original crime, a local college sorority house. When a dedicated female psychiatrist uncovers the administrative screw-up, she rushes to the campus to warn the students, only to find herself trapped inside the house as the killer begins systematically executing the residents. This slasher entry sets itself apart by taking the emerging tropes of the subgenre and presenting them through a highly technical, multidimensional lens. Director Cesare De Nova swaps out the usual wood setting for the sterile, clinical environments of the asylum and the tight wood-paneled corridors of the sorority house. The camera placement is highly strategic, utilizing axes, pipes, long needles, and shattering mirrors to poke directly out toward the viewer, turning standard slasher set pieces into direct physical shocks. The film serves as an excellent, fast-paced slice of mid-80s exploitation history that deals with a unique premise. The narrative subverts standard slasher structures by functioning partially as a medical thriller, tracking the cover-up efforts of the hospital administrators alongside the campus carnage. Supported by a cold, synth-driven musical score, the production delivers an incredibly tense, claustrophobic atmosphere. It stands as a hidden gem of the slash boom, maximizing its optical presentation to place the audience on the front line of the terror. Chain Gang, 1984. An innocent man is framed for a brutal murder and sentenced to serve hard labor at a notoriously corrupt, isolated southern prison camp. Subjected to sadistic guards and backbreaking work under the scorching sun, he quickly realizes that the warden is running a highly profitable, illegal mining operation, using the inmates as slave labor. Knowing he won't survive his sentence, the protagonist begins orchestrating a daring, explosive escape plot from within the chain gang. Shot independently in the rural Deep South, this gritty exploitation drama sets itself apart by applying three-dimensional cinematography to a raw, realistic prison break subgenre. Director Lou Wills avoids the fantasy elements common to the era's boom, choosing instead to bring the harsh environment closer to the audience. The cameras plunge directly into the middle of the labor camps, framing the heavy sledgehammers, flying rock chips, and barbed wire fences so they seemingly jump off the screen, intensifying the gritty, claustrophobic atmosphere. The production thrives on its unvarnished, regional, independent aesthetic. The cast consists largely of rugged character actors and local extras, giving the institutional cruelty a cold, documentary-like edge. By utilizing the depth format to emphasize the physical weight of captivity, the movie transforms a standard Southern exploitation plot into a uniquely immersive, sweat-soaked portrait of survival and revenge. Treasure of the Four Crowns, 1983. A team of elite thieves and antiquities experts is assembled to infiltrate a heavily fortified mountain fortress belonging to a dangerous, mind-controlling religious cult. Their objective: steal four mystical ancient crowns that possess an apocalyptic supernatural power before the cult's unhinged leader can harness them. To succeed, the crew must bypass a labyrinthine gauntlet of deadly mechanical traps, invisible laser grids, and supernatural illusions designed to obliterate any intruders. This wild Spanish-American co-production reunites the creative team behind Comin for a breathless, supernatural heist movie. Director Ferdinando Baldi completely abandons narrative logic, treating the plot as a loose clothesline to hang an endless series of optical depth gags. The three-dimensional format is used with aggressive frequency. Swords, ropes, spinning blades, and mystical energy beams constantly project outward from the screen, turning the theatrical viewing experience into a grueling physical obstacle course. The highlight of the production is a massive, incredibly tense, 20-minute heist sequence that plays out in near-total silence. As the thieves dangle from ropes to avoid pressure-sensitive floors, the cameras look straight down the lines, creating a vertigo-inducing sense of height and space. Backed by a bombastic, sweeping orchestral score by Ennio Morricone, the film embraces pure, unadulterated pulp fantasy. It represents the absolute pinnacle of gimmick-driven filmmaking, where style completely obliterates substance in the most entertaining way possible.
If you enjoyed this trip through the vaults, check out the links in the description for more ways to support the channel. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is somebody's favorite.